When I was younger, I was always fascinated with the story The Princess and the Pea. For those unaware of the story, a prince is in search for a princess to make his wife. None of the princesses in the land fit his high demands, until one rainy night, a princess comes knocking and asks if she can stay until the storm has passed. The queen, suspicious of the young girl, sets a test and places a small pea underneath 20 mattresses. If the girl can still feel the pea, then that would clearly show that she was a princess. Of course, the young girl felt the pea, and they were soon married. But in truth, my fascination wasn't in how a prince finds love, more in how something so small and so minuscule, something insignificant like a pea, could still have such a dramatic impact. Enter the virus. So what do we know about viruses? Well, if you've ever had an infection, be it a cold or flu, the chances are it was a virus. Far more common than bacterial infection. Viruses are what you may call a parasite. They need a host cell to stay alive. Unfortunately, for us, the cells in our bodies make excellent hosts and allow viruses to thrive and spread. Generally, viruses are smaller than a bacterium. I'll try to resist the temptation to talk about the Mimi virus, otherwise known as the giant virus, discovered in Bradford in 1992, or the megavirus in 2010, and the Pandora virus in 2013, both from Chile, just in case you get freaked out. These microbiotic terrorists are beautifully symmetrical. They make their way into our bodies, mainly through our respiratory system, and then they infect our cells. More than that, a virus will take over our cells' machinery to replicate themselves and typically kill off the cell, releasing hundreds, if not thousands, of new copies of itself, infecting more cells and, of course, transmitting the virus back out into the world, ready to infect another human cell. The good news is that viruses really struggle outside of a host body. This is because, unlike bacteria, they have no lasting protective outer wall. Instead, a virus relies on the cells we have in our own bodies to survive, and more importantly, replicate. So once outside, viruses must find a new host to replicate. As we're seeing now, when a new virus emerges, and there are lots of new people who aren't protected by their immune system, we see lots of new infections. Let's be honest, you're all thinking, tell me, is there a treatment for people who become ill with a virus? Simple answer, no, there isn't one. It takes time to develop effective treatments and find out what works for each type of virus. However, we have an incredible army of antibodies within us already, a highly evolved protective system, our immune system, which has developed through human and mammal evolution over millions of years. There is in fact evidence to show that we have a gene called CGIN1, which shows signs of virus interference dating back to 120 to 180 million years ago. Well, what does that mean? Well, it probably means that 180 million years ago, a nasty virus swept the Earth, infecting living organisms until they developed some form of immunity. From that point, those mammals who were immune carried the scars of the virus in their DNA, scars which we still have today. Make no mistake, viruses, although sometimes deadly, are beautiful. These extremely small, symmetrical terrorists are transmitted from host to host and only replicate themselves in living hosts. Viruses, unlike bacteria, have no cell wall. They are small particles of either DNA or RNA that are surrounded by a protein coat, which in many viruses is useless. We won't mention norovirus, as that is very different and a far more stubborn story. However, coronaviruses have a lipid or fat coat with prominent protein spikes. Imagine that on a catwalk. But unfortunately for this virus, the thin coat offers little protective cover and is about as useful as a paper coat in a monsoon when outside of a host cell. With virtually no protection from the outside world, they can only replicate inside a host cell where it can thrive. Think about it as a moon landing. The rocket is the virus and the moon is the cell. As soon as the rocket lands on the moon, it starts to mine into the moon's crust, much like a virus burrows into the cell wall. When the rocket is fully submerged in the moon, the astronauts inside are then free to emerge, causing havoc, multiplying and feeding on the moon's resources until nothing of the moon is left, and all the new astronauts and rockets pop off, looking for more moons to infiltrate and plunder. Before 2020, when most people heard the word virus, they would think of disease-causing pathogenic viruses such as the common cold, influenza, chickenpox, human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, HPV, measles, mumps, rubella and many others. However, now, when we hear virus, we think of SARS CoV2 or the coronavirus, or even the disease, COVID-19. Goodness, don't we scientists like our complicated names? In truth, it is still early days. The research, understanding and knowledge of what COVID-19 is and the effect that it will have on the world's population for years to come are little known. But we love a challenge, so here goes. The A to Z of COVID-19, or should that be the C to 9 of COVID-19. When looking at COVID-19, we have to understand its relationship with the coronavirus family. Coronaviruses are a large family of viruses that are known to cause illness, ranging from the common cold to more severe diseases, such as Middle East Respiratory Syndrome and Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, SARS. Essentially, coronavirus are a family of viruses that attack the respiratory system. COVID-19 stands for CO, corona, vi, virus, D, disease, discovered in 2019. So what does corona mean? Well, if you look at these viruses with an electron microscope, they appear to be surrounded by a shiny halo, or corona, made of spike proteins, which, as we will see later, are very important. So the pronunciation should be COVID-19 and certainly not COVID-19, but that's just a personal pet peeve. Inside each of your 30 trillion cells, there is around 2 meters of DNA, your own specific DNA. The DNA your parents combined to create you, in a totally unique and unrepeatable sequence of DNA. No matter how many siblings you may have, the one and only you. And that's not just today or tomorrow or for the rest of your life. You are the only you to exist, and the only you that will ever exist. Feel special? Good. Now, it's here in the DNA where we will find a lot of answers, but also questions. Our DNA is stored in the cells of our body. The ladder formation of our DNA that we are so familiar with gives our cells instructions to make RNA and proteins, a well-oiled machine. Now imagine a virus infiltrates the cell and brings with it its own DNA or RNA. Soon, the cell gets taken over and controlled by the virus, forced into creating more virus DNA and virus RNA. For example, the coronavirus genome is made of RNA. In the cell's last moment of existence, it sends out a signal to the body's immune system, the good guys. They have to come and sort it all out and defeat the virus. This is very common, and we, as humans, deal with it every day without even knowing about it. So how do new viruses occur? And how might something like COVID-19, or SARS CoV2 to give it its proper name, have entered our world? Let's go back to the cell. This time in an animal cell, in a pangolin, a sort of scaly anteater. Its cell is being attacked by a member of the coronavirus family, which causes it a mild disease, just like we might get a common cold. The virus is infecting its cells, introducing its genetic material into those cells and hijacking the cell's own internal machinery to make more virus particles. But wait, what's this? Another virus has just entered the picture. A coronavirus, this time from a bat, possibly. It's also entered the same infected cell. Now we have 3 sets of genomes flying around. DNA and RNA from the pangolin host, and RNA from the different coronavirus. This is juggling on acid. As the metaphorical dust settles, the RNA reforms and a new virus is created. A virus with a new RNA combination, a bit like shuffling a pack of cards. This new virus is the precursor to SARS CoV2. And after a few more changes, or mutations, this virus is now able to infect humans. This new virus then goes on to attack our cells within our bodies. Although what makes this virus even better at infecting our cells is that lipid fat coat with prominent protein spikes. Remember that? Yes. Well, this has a modified spike protein that makes it look like a shiny corona or crown surrounding the virus. In the case of COVID-19, or SARS CoV2, the spikes are 4 amino acids longer. And these 4 amino acids are great news for the virus, but bad news for us, because the virus can infect more efficiently and then multiply more and more until it kills the host cell or until it is defeated by the immune system. In the meantime, plenty of its offspring are coughed, sneezed, wiped or breathed out of our bodies onto another host or onto a surface, waiting for a host to just pick it up and smear it across their face. And so the cycle continues. It's not all bleak, however. Our immune system is incredible and will try its very best to identify any virus and eradicate it. Now, some viruses have developed mechanisms to avoid detection. Some mimic host cells and go undetected. Some hide from our immune systems. But eventually, most viruses are surrounded by these vastly bigger and more powerful antibodies, and any virally infected cells are killed by our immune system. That way, the virus is stopped. Our challenge is to make sure it is stopped before we transmit the virus to anyone else. And with a virus like COVID-19 that is so highly contagious that one doesn't even show symptoms for up to 2 weeks, This can be difficult. However, work is happening around the world to help us lower our chances of infection. Work to create a vaccine which will artificially prime and activate our immune system to give us a much better chance of fighting off the virus. So being positive, how can we stop the spread of COVID-19 or SARS CoV-2? If we were to look at different strategies throughout the world, here are some examples. Total wipeout, chosen by New Zealand. An early lockdown and closure of borders to all apart from returning citizens. Early testing and a tight lockdown helped by a small population and a large landmass of 47 people per square mile meant that New Zealand managed the pandemic with only 22 deaths. Real questions are still to be asked as to whether this approach was acceptable and how sustainable it was for the future. We know COVID-19 isn't going away. It's here with us now, forever. So how will New Zealand's population deal with future tourism, trade, or just modern lifestyles? Herd immunity, chosen by Sweden. In Sweden, they refused to lock down completely, or at all really, opting for a more open approach to the pandemic. Visits to care homes and events for over 50 people were banned, although schools, shops and restaurants remained open. Social distancing was entirely voluntary. In reality, despite Sweden's sparse population at only 64 people per square mile, they have recorded 5,700 deaths, 90% of them occurring in the over 70s. The reasoning for this policy? If the virus is allowed to move through the majority of the population, the country gains an immunity to the virus, and normal life can resume without fear of second or third spikes. The pitfalls? A high death rate per population. Sitting on the fence. Chosen by the UK. Lockdown was initiated on March the 23rd, 2 weeks after Italy and Spain. Borders weren't closed initially, and we all know the results, with over 45,000 reported deaths by early July, and expecting the number to be closer to 60,000 by the end of the year. It should be noted that actually the UK is vastly more populated, with 727 people per square mile, with a much smaller landmass. If the UK will see a second or third spike, or whether it, like Sweden, will have some form of herd immunity, still remains to be seen. It is the curse of the scientist to look at life in a very matter-of-fact, black and white nature. Maybe this helps or hinders in such a pandemic. The truth is that time will decide which method is the most effective against COVID-19. One issue is that viruses are continually mutating and changing the way in which they interact with us and with other animals. Their very existence has defined who we are as humans. But that doesn't mean that we should surrender to them. So what should we do? Keeping social distancing in place. Washing our hands to disrupt that fatty lipid membrane coat of the viruses. But possibly, and most importantly, not touching your face without washing your hands first. And if you fall into an immunocompromised category, or if you are over the age of 60, you have to be especially vigilant. These simple rules will keep you as safe as possible. But in what seems to be an ever increasingly strange world, we need to remember that viruses have been part of our world since, well, forever. These tiny microbes are doing their job. They make us who we are. So, should you lock your doors and stay hidden until a vaccine is found? We do have vaccines for other viruses, smallpox and polio. with the world's top scientists, like those who've been trained, including those at the University of Warwick and Coventry University, nothing is impossible. But until then, take comfort in knowing that statistically you are still unlikely to contract COVID-19 and be seriously ill. Living in the UK, it is thought that you currently have a small chance of that happening to you. It's a risk, but it's a manageable risk. And we take risks every day. It's what makes us human. We jump out of aeroplanes, we climb rock faces, we drive cars, we cross the road whilst peering at our mobile phones. We walk down staircases in baggy pyjamas and ill-fitting slippers. And mostly, we survive. As it stands in 2020, COVID-19 clearly poses a risk to the health of humanity. But viruses were here before us, and they'll be here long after. So our advice? Wash your hands, keep that distance, avoid touching your face without washing your hands first. And please remember, living is a risky business, but it certainly beats the alternative. So keep safe and don't forget to live your life.